Today we're going to be talking about Ayurveda and the language and symbols of creation that it uses. And so I'll be going through a PowerPoint, and it may make sense just to maybe go through the slides that I have and then stop and open for discussion, just so there's some kind of continuity of the various points that I want to make. But if along the way any of you are lost at all, feel free to just open your mic and ask a question. Okay, so let me just open up and share the PowerPoint that we're going to go through and introduce the topic for today. So today what I'd like to do is to take a look at Ayurveda. Many of you have probably heard a little bit about Ayurveda and even be familiar with it. For those of you who are not, Ayurveda is an ancient Indian modality of health and healing. And the actual term Ayurveda translates as the knowledge of life, right? So Ayur being life and Vidya being knowledge or wisdom. And so in a way, this means that Ayurveda is actually more than just a system of health and healing. It's an approach to life. It's a lifestyle, if you will, and it shows us how to be in harmony with ourselves, our body, mind, and soul, but also, as importantly, how to live in harmony with others and with our environment and even with the planets. So it's truly a holistic approach to life. And I'm not aware that there are others, ancient modalities like this, but surely there must be. And I know Teresa and Charles are here. They are schooled in the TCM. And so we'll be very interested in their comments and comparisons. But for myself, it's Ayurveda is what I studied for a couple of years out in Albuquerque, New Mexico at Dr. Ladd's. Let me just admit Arnu here. At Dr. Ladd's Institute. And at the time, I was a Jyotishi, a Vedic astrologer. So my use of this was to really combine the Ayurvedic consultation with the Vedic birth chart, which is exactly what Dr. Ladd does. So, I chose this topic because I felt when we came to the subject of symbols and language that it would be a great illustration of how Ayurveda incorporates both the language and the symbols of creation. And you'll see that there's kind of this perfect alignment between the two as we go through. What I'd like to do maybe before we get into the actual topic is just give a brief overview of the origin of Ayurveda. I'm going to have to get that out of the way. Okay. So what we have here is a timeline from India and some of the scriptures at various time periods. And what you'll see is that these two green ones at the end, Charaka Samhita and Shushuta Samhita, somewhere around 400 to 600 BC. These are what we refer to as the classical Ayurvedic texts or scriptures. And so many people view Ayurveda as being introduced to the world around this 400 to 500 time period. But actually, if you go back to the Vedas, we had the earliest Veda here you see in orange being Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yaja Veda, and Atharva Veda, the four orange ones. And if you go back to the Atharva Veda, which is the fourth Veda, you'll see that this Veda was actually about health and healing, and even more than health and healing. It also was a holistic approach to life in that it included relationships, marriage, ecology, philosophy in it. And so in my mind, Ayurveda really got its roots or has its origins in the Atharva Veda. And I would even go so far as to say that its roots go as far back as the Rig Veda, because you'll see that almost 60% of the hymns in the Atharva Veda are sourced from the Rig Veda, and this Rig Veda being the oldest spiritual scripture in India and probably the world. So it's very, very ancient modality that clearly changes and modifies with time, and even continues today to change and modify. So let's see how the language and symbols that are used by Ayurveda are the same as those in creation. And to change the slide here. And in order to do this, we'll need to take a look at creation. So in the Vedic scriptures, there are many different descriptions or ways that creation has been described. If we look at one of the oldest descriptions, which is the famous Nasadiya hymn in the Rig Veda, here we have a rishi who has this vision of the early stages of creation. And his vision includes what appears to him to be this vast, endless, kind of motionless sea of water. But then he notices something. Something stirs in the depths of that sea. And the rishi perceives a subtle urge or a desire, a vague desire, that actually created the ripple in the waters. And with that ripple, the process of creation begins. I think Vladimir mentioned a little bit last time that this urge or desire that we see in almost all the ancient Indian stories around creation was really the desire for that one who was motionless, right, in that vast sea, to know and to experience all his forms, all his infinite personalities. And for that reason, that desire creates a ripple, and we have the beginning of creation. Now, Sri Aurobindo, in his commentary on the Isha Upanishad, refers to another, yet a very similar image of creation. And this will look familiar to everyone. And here, we've got the Puranic image of Vishnu as the Eternal One. And although he's not asleep here, originally he is asleep on the waveless waters of creation here. And then we see the snake Ananta and all his many, many coils that makes up the bed for Vishnu. And actually, Ananta means the infinite. So it's only when Vishnu awakens, as he opens his eyes, that the snake Ananta stirs, and the first ever ripple is created on the surface of the waters, which begins the evolution of matter. And Sri Aurobindo refers to the waveless waters of creation here in the Puranic image of Vishnu as the causal ocean. And he describes it, and actually it was a rishi. He is commenting in the Isha Upanishad, a rishi's vision or experience, who describes what he is seeing as a matter, a substance that he says is so refined, it's so simple, it's so undeveloped, but in this causal ocean, what appears to be an ocean, that it's pregnant with the entire material evolution. So it becomes this kind of the seed state or causal state of matter. And obviously, we can notice the symbolism between these two stories of creation. They both involve this kind of vast, immobile, watery-like substance, perceived by both Rashis, the Rashis in the Rig Veda as well as in the Isha Upanishad. And they give this the symbol to this watery-like substance as this endless, calm sea. right? So we have this symbol now that is representing what the rishis ultimately say is a bliss-filled substance. No other distinguishing sensation, that this ocean is pure bliss or pure love, if you will. And so we see this in both, that creation started out of this substance that's so refined, that's so vast, that is composed of pure bliss, pure ananda, or pure love. And the other common symbol between the two stories is a ripple, right? We see this ripple in the waters, it's motionless, and this ripple is a symbol for the stirring of the faint urge or desire that we spoke of. You know, in the Puranic image of Vishnu, as he opens his eyes, snake Ananda stirs, and it creates this ripple in the vast ocean. And although snake Ananda symbolizes many things, right? One of the things in general that a snake symbolizes is desire. And so this stirring that begins the process of creation in both scenarios is that desire, like we said before, of that one to know and to experience his forms and endless personalities. So it's just a use, it's just also to demonstrate the use of symbols in many of these creation images or many of the creation descriptions that we find. And although we won't do it at this time, we could spend quite a bit of time analyzing the rest of this picture of Vishnu and what each of the items in his hands represents relative to creation. We normally get or see Lakshmi at his feet, which also is symbolic. And, you know, Vladimir the other day mentioned also that, you know, Brahma is taking birth from a lotus stem coming out of Vishnu's navel. Another typical way that creation is pictured. So all these are symbols. But again, what I want to really move to is to elaborate a bit on what the rishis cognized or perceived from this point on. So here, this first ripple or vibration in the ocean of causal matter. So you'll see the white circle, causal matter, at the bottom of the three. It creates this next state of matter. And the rishis end up labeling this state or calling this state a subtle state of matter. And then from the subtle state of matter, then we see eventually the gross state of matter is created. So let me just admit this person. So the rishis perceived three primary realms or conditions of matter: causal, subtle, and growth. And Sri Aurobindo adds that in this causal ocean of the substance that's pure bliss, pure love, that matter appears to the rishis to be so refined as to appear to be identical with spirit, right? In this causal state, spirit and matter appear to be one and the same, because matter has come down to just the most fine, indistinguishable substance, if you will. And of course, at the opposite extreme, when we go out to the gross state of matter, we see spirit is so densified as to appear identical to matter, right? But still, spirit and matter are one and the same reality. I want to focus in on the subtle state of matter, because this is where the preparation for gross manifestation is happening. And this is where we start to see, although we see it also in the causal, we start to see, I think somebody's got their mic open. So the subtle state of matter is really where the preparation is occurring for the gross state of manifestation. And there's two important qualities in the subtle state of matter that we'll see is also foundational to Ayurveda. The first is that the presence of what we know to be the gunas, right? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. This as the ripple, as the desire creates a ripple, and the ripple spreads out into this ocean, that it releases the three, or I should say, these three gunas become active. They become dynamic. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And we'll go through the three in a second for those that may not be familiar with these three. The other thing that the rishis sensed or noticed was subtle elements in this subtle state of matter. And that these subtle elements, they call them tanmatras, they each had their individual sense property, if you will. The way in which the particular tanmatra could be recognized. And so for this, which, let's see. Oh, okay, now I'm going to do I'll do the three gunas first. So here what we have is this wonderful quote, although I've modified it a little bit just in rearranging it for the purpose of this discussion, from Sri Aurobindo on the gunas, the three gunas. And what he says of these three gunas is that each is a reflection or a step-down version of a power of a higher level of existence. So typically when we speak of tamas, which is the first and lowest, if you will, we typically think of tamas as inertia or dullness or even incapacity of action. But what Sri Aurobindo says is that there is, on a higher existence, on a more spiritual existence, tamas is really this divine calm and perfect power holding in itself all its capacity and capable of controlling and subjecting to the law of calm, even the most stupendous and enormous activity, right? So this is a little different than what we typically would define tamas as. But what Sri Aurobindo is alerting us to here is that, yes, as these gunas kind of play out in manifestation, their lower qualities come out. But at a higher level, a more spiritual level, we actually have kind of divine qualities around each of them. It's not that we all want to become sattvic, if you will, but no, they each play their role, and you can see the picture here. They're all three intertwined in part and in balance when they're into their divine state. And the second one is Rajas. Now, Rajas, again, we typically will say, well, it's desire, it's passion, it's ambition, it's endeavor. But again, Sri Aurobindo says on a higher existence, it is a self-affecting, initiating, sheer will of the spirit and a perfect power capable of an infinite, steady, and blissful action. Right? So the nature of that action, instead of desire and striving passion, now becomes steady and blissful action. And the third one, sattva, we normally think of it, well, it's harmony, it's balance, it's, in many ways, it's considered to be kind of what Sri Aurobindo says, a modified mental light. But even on a higher existence, Sri Aurobindo says, it is the self-existent light of the soul and its perfect power of being, which illumines and unifies the divine quietude, right? Divine quietude being tamas, and the divine will of action being rajas. And then he says something very interesting. He says, the ordinary liberation gets the still divine light, here sattva, in the divine quietude, tamas, but the integral perfection will aim at this greater trinal unity, right? What the integral perfection is bringing in rajas, not just the divine light, not just the divine quietude, but a higher integral liberation is really all three. We want also action, living in the world, if you will, moving about in the world and not just pure leaving this world as a liberation. So I found this just a really, really powerful quote by Sri Aurobindo on the gunas. And, in Ayurveda, this is really the first way in which the quality and the attributes and the inclinations of the mind is evaluated. They look at the sattva, rajas, and tamas mix, if you will, of the person. And in classical texts, they actually mention 16 psychological types, 16 different combinations of sattva, rajas, and tamas that a person could have in terms of his or her psychology. And what's so very interesting, since we're speaking on symbols, is that in these classical texts, instead of describing each of these psychological types as we would normally in kind of plain English, if you will, they use symbols. And their symbols are based on various gods and asuras, right? So an example here is for the sattvic state, which I think has 8 or 9 of the 16. One of the symbols for the psychological typecast is Indra, right? And the text doesn't go into a lot, but the text does say for Indra, what is the psychological orientation? It says it's a happy-go-lucky individual that's brave and outgoing. And then another one is Yama, who is Lord of Death in the older Puranic time, and more recent Puranic time. And here, for example, it says the traits of this individual is characterized as readiness for action, freedom from attachment, etc. So they just give a couple brief definitions around the symbol that they're using, which in the sattvic case is the gods. As we go into the rajas and tamas symbols, they become more the asuric type. So Ayurveda, again, 16 psychological types that are used around sattva, rajas, and tamas in categorizing mental orientation of individuals. So now we go to the second aspect of what the rishis cognized or perceived in this more subtle realm. And this is what they ended up calling the tanmatras, again, subtle elements, which in this subtle realm, these subtle elements end up through combinations making subtle forms in this kind of subtle matter, if you will. Before actually manifesting in the physical growth, there are combinations of these tanmatras that combine. But their pure form is found only in the subtle realm, and from there, subtle forms, and from there, gross forms. So the 5, and many of you are familiar with these, but it was very interesting. Just admit here, but it's very interesting how the rishis describe these, because they end up using what Sri Aurobindo calls conventional symbols as they come across this substance, different substances in the subtle realm. They look around, which is what conventional symbols are. They look around in the outer world, in their outer environment, and they try to find something that has a similar substance, a similar in a gross form, but similar attributes. Right? And so as we go through these 5, I'm going to do a little bit of quoting from Sri Aurobindo, because it's, again, another just very amazing way that the rishis discover and perceive these. The first that they perceive was this, the original state of subtle matter, which is kind of the pure ethereal, of which the main characteristics are tenuity, or this lack of substance or thinness. Lack of substance or thinness, the rishis perceived, and this pervasiveness. And they noticed that there was one sensible property, one property by which they could sense the existence, or we could sense the existence of this particular element, which they called akasha eventually, and its sound, shabda. So sound is this first evolved property of material substance. Right? And we know that, in the Bible, in the beginning was the word, right? The word is sound. So sound perceives form, and sound also has the power to create and destroy it. But the way they describe this is, and I'm just going to quote this, Sri Aurobindo's commentary is looking around them, the rishis looking around them in the physical universe for a substance with these characteristics, right? The characteristics of being lacking substance or thinness and pervasiveness. They found it in the sky. They looked up and they saw the sky vyom, and they called it vyom, or later akasha. And it meant not just kind of the atmosphere above, but what they implied, or what they were implying by this symbol, is that it was everything above our terrestrial world, that it was beyond and above our atmosphere and pervades everything. And that's how they were experiencing this pervasive connecting substance in the casual world. So they used the sky as the conventional symbol for this extremely delicate and light material. And they call it akasha, or vyom, sky. And then the second element, the next element that evolved from akasha and was moving within it, was sort of this pure aerial or gaseous condition, of matter. They word these as conditions of matter. And this was like lacking any substance or solidity. So here, due to pervasiveness, to pervasiveness that we saw in the akasha, was added this new potency of sensible and varied emotion. Right? And in this second power of matter, this new property of material substance evolved: touch or contact, right? Which wasn't there, or at least wasn't fully developed in the pure akash. So again, seeking for a physical substance in nature characterized by motion, and what they saw was sort of this imperfect pervasiveness. It was irregular. It wasn't perfect like we had in Akash, and something that was not yet with form, but it could be sensed by both sound and contact. And the rishis found it in vayu, in wind or air. Therefore, vayu became the symbol, the conventional symbol for the second condition of matter. And from there, fire, evolving out of this pure gaseous state and moving in it is this they call it kind of this luminous energy, this luminous energy that's produced by heat. And in this stage, right, this pervasiveness that they saw in Akasha becomes still less subtle than it was, and this motion that they sensed in the wind and vayu is no longer the major characteristic, but now energy, and especially, Sri Aurobindo says, formative energy attains its full development and formation, and its destruction at this stage. And so now, as we look at fire or Agni, in addition to the sound and the contact, matter evolved a third property from fire, and that was form, right? Which couldn't be developed in pure air, right? Because it wasn't dense enough. And obviously, it was also kind of too volatile to form an actual structure or form. And so this power of matter that had light and heat within it, the rishis looked around And they saw that here in their terrestrial environment, that it had all the characteristics, or many of the characteristics, of fire. Because why? Fire, you can hear fire, it's crackling of fire, you can contact fire, you can touch the heat, and it has form, you can see fire. So fire became the third element. And then they went on with water, again, water being now this liquid state. And really, it's kind of the first principle in which this fluid could actually produce life, if you will. We read in many places, I think even in the Ayurveda, all life is gathered out of the waters. And so life depends on this fluid principle for its substance. And out of water, we had the rishis sense a fourth property, which was taste. So water has a very fluid, half volatile, half fixed, but perceptible by sound, contact, water, and taste. So the rishis gave it the symbolic name of water to this fourth. And finally, we get to the state, the solid state, which was the last to progress out of this subtle realm. And it has the most extreme fixity. Fixity actually dominates. And as we know, it's really the substratum of all solid forms and bodies. And the last necessity for the development of life, right? Because it provides life now with a fixed form or body in which it can work itself out, in which it can develop into an organism. And so this last sense of property of matter involved, this last sense that evolved was odor. Since earth is typically solid substance, as they looked around and what has this property of sound, contact, form, and taste, it was earth. And so the rishis gave the conventional symbol earth to this fifth. And again, these are symbols of conditions of matter that are in the subtle realm. Now, to this is actually one of the major building blocks in Ayurveda. And to these subtle properties that the rishis perceived or cognized, Ayurveda adds another 18 or 20 subtle qualities for these 5 tanmatras. And now we get to the last, which is the gross realm or gross condition of matter. And here, obviously, we're familiar with the 5 gross elements that the rishis just use as conventional symbols: the air, ether, fire, water, and earth. And what Ayurveda does, it is certainly foundational to Ayurveda, but they go a step further and they group these 5 elements into kind of 3 basic functional principles, which they call Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So if you look at the picture, you'll see the top Vata. Vata is a combination of ether and air. Pitta, fire and water, although mostly fire. And Kapha, water and earth, although mostly earth. And they realize they group these functions because these are the 3 functions that are required, especially within bodily form, but in all of nature. Right? We need Vata. Vata supports movement, right? So we need movement of breath, of muscles, of limbs, etc. Another important function which Pitta satisfies is transformation. Transformation, again, within the body is this digestion of food, right? And producing, when it's mixed with water, because Pitta is also partly water, produces chyme, which is that fluidy substance that then passes into the small intestines. And the third is Kapha. Kapha, again, earth and water, which supports all the anabolic processes in the body. So we have the building, we have the repairing, we have the healing of organs and tissues. So with these three, they are called actually doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, dosha. Now, dosha translates as fault or impurity. But in the classical Ayurvedic text, the word dosha is actually used to mean organization. So we think of these as three different organizations. And Ayurveda to these three doshas identify 7 different combinations. More Vata than Pitta and Kapha, more Pitta than Kapha and Vata, etc. So 4 sort of archetypal combinations to these doshas. And Ayurveda sees these again as being universal principles really to all aspects of material creation, minerals, plants, animals. They see it as being functional to the time of day. Each hour or period of the time is defined as Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. The seasons, each of the seasons are also classified as Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. And even the planets. Being a Jyotishi, each planet in Vedic astrology has a particular dosha, a particular mix, one of these 7 archetypes, right? And it just happens to be in Vedic astrology that we use 7 planets, and each one represents one of these archetypes. And of course, each one also has a particular guna, Sattva, Rajas, or Tamas, but we won't go there for now. But it's this idea that these are universal principles that function everywhere. Whether it's the animal kingdom, the time of day, the seasons, the planets, human beings. So that means that this human physiology that embodies these principles are embodied everywhere. So everything in the whole universe gets connected in one way or another through these 3 doshas, if you will. So just to summarize a bit, right, back to these 3 states, we have the causal matter, which we said is bliss-filled state, and it really represents a soul or a spirit, which Ayurveda acknowledges. It's the subtle matter, which comes out of the causal, which includes the 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, which Ayurveda adds 16 various combinations. It's the 5 tan mantras and their subtle qualities, which Ayurveda gives 20 qualities to. And then on the gross level, it recognizes 5 gross elements, but it groups them into 3 functional categories. And of those 3 functional categories, which is composed of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, there are 7 main archetypes, if you will. So I think one of the things that this picture shows, and why I like it so much, is that it really illustrates how everything, all manifestation, ultimately came from the same source, right? This causal state, this causal realm of substance that was perceived by the rishis as being pure, blissful existence, or pure ananda, pure love. So everything in the manifest universe is birthed out of this substance. And this is why Ayurveda also maintains that everyone, there is this oneness that supports the universe, this oneness that creates this substance, this causal substance that creates the oneness, and that oneness supports kind of the unity in the world. And one of the quotes in the earlier Ayurvedic texts, what is there in the external cosmos is existing within this body, and vice versa. Both are one and the same when one realizes thyself. So at the root, with the foundation, we have this notion or this belief that we are all one and the same in the universe. There is a oneness or a unity amongst all because of these creation principles, if you will. And then we have Alan Watts saying something similar in 1960. The first quote was back from 500 BC when we have many of the classical Ayurvedic texts being codified. But the next one, which wasn't too long ago, Alan Watts in 1960, you are the universe experiencing itself. Right, the same notion. And then finally, and one of my favorite, Eckhart Tolle in 1980, you are not in the universe, you are the universe, an intrinsic part of it. Ultimately, you are not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. What an amazing miracle. So as we awaken, the universe awakens. Right? So all this again is a part of the spiritual and philosophical foundation of Ayurveda. So let me just go to now a couple summary slides that will hopefully pull all this together. If we look now at the building blocks for Ayurveda, which are taken from the language and symbols for creation, what we said is at the outermost realm, at the gross realm, there's 5 gross elements and their functional combinations, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And out of Vata and Pitta and Kapha, there's 7 different combinations, if you will, 7 doshic types that you see at the bottom there. To that, in the subtle realm, we have these Tan mantras, and they're behind the gross elements and doshas. And there's 20 subtle elements that Ayurveda uses. These are actually more critical than the doshas, believe it or not, because these are supporting. These are, if you will, forming in the subtle realm the doshas that are going to manifest physically. And then lastly, we mentioned the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And out of that, Ayurveda classifies 16 different combinations. So 7 doshic combinations, 20 subtle elements, 16 psychological combinations of the 3 gunas. These are all the different permutations that combine in total to provide diversity within this oneness that we just saw in the universe. Yes, Ayurveda says we are all one. There is a oneness. We all come and are made of the same substance, but we are also each unique. And this uniqueness is critical to Ayurveda, and it results in, again, the acknowledgement of the many different combinations of the 7 doshic combinations, the 20 subtle elements, and the 16 psychological typecasting can produce. And none of these are viewed in Ayurveda as independent. It's not like we look at the mind and classify it by one of the 16 different typecasts, and then we look at the body and we say, well, what doshic and maybe what elements. They're all interlinked, interdependent in Ayurveda. And so Ayurveda understands that these psychological attributes or gunas in a person actually influences the physical constitution and its functioning, the doshas, right, and its operations, and the opposite, that the physical constitution and its functioning influences the psychological attributes in a person. So they're intermixed and intertwined and constantly in interaction with each other. So what Ayurveda does with all this is that, again, they come up with unique patterns in nature that they see that represents these different combinations of gunas, qualities, and doshas, right? Just as the rishis in the Isha Upanishad looked around their outer environment, their outer nature, to find a symbol that would reflect some truth behind it. So too did the Ayurvedic, I don't know if you call them authors or those that cognized Ayurveda, looked around in the external environment and found unique patterns in nature to reflect these different combinations. Now, there's many combinations, right? We can get over 100, but they classified starting primarily with 3 and then 7, and then they refine it. So the very basic patterns, which is the physical typecasting, if you will, is a Vata person, right? A Vata person is what? Mostly air and space. So we have thin, tall, long legs, long arms. We have a very specific pattern occurring in nature that is a prototype for the Vata person. And so on with the Pitta and with the Kapha person. So recognizing these patterns in nature as symbols, right, of what lies behind the form, right? This is just the conventional, the outer form, but the Ayurvedic uses these conventional symbols to inform him not only the physical constitution of the individual, but also their physiological strengths and weaknesses, their personal functional habits, whether they'll be susceptible to different illnesses or diseases, what their mental and emotional aptitude and attributes are like, and so on. It's an entire archetype, if you will, that's bundled and illustrated by this outer symbol occurring in nature, which is the pattern of the physical body. So the last slide, and then we can open it up for discussion. Sorry, this has taken a little longer than I had thought. But here, I think Plato's aphorism becomes very relevant to Ayurveda. Plato says, it is far more important to know what type of person suffers from a disease rather than what disease the person is suffering from. So this is really in Ayurveda. They look first and foremost as to the type of person, and then they begin to analyze the disease, because that disease will mutate and show differently depending on what the outer form is. Vata, Pitta, Kapha, along with the different qualities and gunas. So with that, I'm just going to open it up, and I'm hoping that this kind of tied together and it made sense, and I didn't lose anyone. But please, any comments, questions, your own experience with Ayurveda, we'd love to hear.
You can unmute yourself and speak. I made it possible, so please go ahead.
First of all, Radhe, this was just beautiful. Thank you so much. It was just amazing, this presentation. I had one question. So can this, I'm sure it, but I need your explanation. This can also be related to yin and yang, right? Ayurveda, the balance.
Yin and yang is Chinese. Do we have Teresa? I think Teresa and Charles. Let's turn to them and get their thoughts or ideas on this. My thing is yes, but I'm not. Let's find two people more skilled and familiar with that symbol.
Well, the idea for me anyway is that when we start seeing it from symbols, then our meaning is ascribed to the symbols. So we can take any symbols and ascribe our meaning to it, depending upon our perception or our beliefs. So I know very little about Ayurvedic medicine, but however, there are some principles in it that are common to more the field of seeing it from sacred geometry, per se. Like, for example, when you had the causal, the subtle, and the gross, right? Then for me, what I was hearing was that the yin and the yang of it would be the causal and the gross would be, how am I going with this? And anyway, the subtle is this transitional phase, right? Going from subtle to gross. And it's in the yin yang symbol where you have the black and the white meeting, that line at which they meet is called the Ling Shu, which means the cosmic hinge. And so in sacred geometry, where two opposites meet or two things that are different meets, that creates a transitional gradient feedback zone. So everything happens in the cosmic hinge, which is really interesting to me because I'm translating my projections onto your question. But I think the commonality in it is that you're looking at subtle and you're looking at gross or causal and you're looking at growth, and then there is a transitional zone which is in there, and that transitional zone and the yin yang or the Taiji 2 symbol is that black, which is called the cosmic hinge, and then that creates a dual or an opposite that allows there to be a feedback loop. So it's not just that I think that it's only a one-way street between subtle and gross, right? It's a feedback loop, and that is how consciousness moves through the field. Which, interestingly enough, the field, when I was listening to it, is that that ocean, right? And you have ripples on the ocean from desire. What I'm hearing in that is the field, is Kshetram, and the description of the field. So then we can extrapolate any information from that particular model and put Ayurvedic onto it, or put classical Chinese medicine, and we'll see commonalities that are common to the symbols, not necessarily common to the language. The symbols become a codex, a way to translate and to begin to see the unity of all things, because they share a same fundamental structure, right?
Right.
And so I kind of went off on that, but that was just stream of consciousness. And
I think that feedback loop that you're mentioning, and thank you so much for that, Charles, that feedback loop that you're mentioning, that's exactly what Ayurveda sees as one of the loops, being between the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and the qualities, these 20 qualities that are more subtle, and eventually the gross body and the dosha. There's constantly one impacting the other. There's this constant interdependency and activity happening. And this is why, a mental mindset that is perhaps too tamasic or too rajasic, too fearful, too afraid, too anxious, that influences obviously the subtle qualities of the body, which ultimately can manifest in a physical disease. Right? So this is constantly, this loop between these three are constantly influencing, and you change any one and you can influence the other. So that's how I see in Ayurveda this feedback loop that you were mentioning, Charles.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments or questions?
I had a question. Are the 5 Tan mantras also known as the Panch Mahabhutas?
The 5 gross elements are the Pancha Mahabhutas. So the outer manifestation of these mantras that the rishis perceive ends up being the Mahabhutas. Pancha Mahabhutas.
So the outer manifestations are called Panch Mahabhuta, and the essence or the inner elements are the 5 Tan mantras. Thank you so much.
Tanmatras.
The 5 kind of conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Radhe,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So another similarity is that the Chinese medicine has the field in Chinese medicine are these 5 phases that are reduced down to these symbols of elements. So we have the same 5 phases, and then also in the geometries, the Platonic solids were named after Plato, and Plato had ascribed the complete breakdown of the creation to these 5 geometric forms that are called the Platonic solids, and he ascribed different elements to the solids. So we're back into the 5, symbology, and we're also into the geometry that unifies these various schools of thought. But when you go to the geometries, then you can use that as a codex to start to decipher some of these other similarities, because consciousness is one. And I think it's just different levels of understanding and brain development and, kind of social engineering that happened on the planet from unseen forces that are involved here as far as our development. But there's a commonality to all of these things which can be found in the geometries, which is, when we do our presentation, it really is going to show all the geometries as a symbol of how consciousness is moving through itself to become self-aware. And then it's easy to just see things in the way that I'm sharing with you. If you're interested.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. And yes, Charles and Teresa will be doing the Sunday Sangha in 2 or 3 weeks here to elaborate more on this topic. So yeah, thank you definitely for that.
I have
Any other comments,
Ron?
thoughts?
Don't?
Yeah. First, thank you. As many people are saying, it was a wonderfully integral, comprehensive presentation. I loved especially how you really brought out that the Ayurvedic discipline, like astrology, can be used to refer all things back to the one. So my comment is, I love that. I remember my Ayurvedic practitioner saying, I can give you lists of things, doshas for food and exercise and all that. But what I suggest you do is, as you walk around all day, begin to tune into these qualities and doshas, and you'll start, and same with the elements in astrology, you'll find them everywhere. And as you get quieter and quieter and open to that, it's like this miraculous array of symbolic presentations of the divine. So I thought you really brought it out beautifully. So I just want to say I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a good point, because one of the things that Dr. Lod had us do when we were in school was that he made us go out for 2 or 3 days in a row, and everything we saw, we had to see if we could connect what the qualities were behind it, right? To get used to these 20 qualities that really end up manifesting gross matter, if you will. And anything obviously has 2 or 3. And so getting, like you're saying, tuning in and getting familiar with these qualities and how they manifest on the outer side, their form or pattern in nature, if you will. I also just wanted to say that even in the classical texts, Jyotish, Vedic astrology, is mentioned. The planets are mentioned. There are gemstones associated with each of the planets that match their dosha and their guna. And these gemstones are ground up. And not here in the U.S., it hasn't been approved, but in India, then this is one of the remedies that you can take. So there's this linking. These sciences, in my mind, Jyotish, Vastu, palmistry, Ayurveda, all used to be one. Also, all one and much more synergistic than what we're practicing them today. We've kind of parsed them all out as, I believe, we got more into the Kali Yuga and unable to hold all this information together. But at one time, and I believe this one time was probably the golden age in India, 400 to 600 BC, where these were all the same. The Ayurvedic practitioner was also a Jyotishi, was also practiced Vastu. Because you see these interlinks between the shastras of these amazing sciences and arts. So Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure, Jane.
Yeah, I'm still at a beginning stage of understanding all of this. And I was looking, as you were talking about the three doshas, you were talking about there were two parts that were not connected, or if you will, and that's ether and fire, and air and earth. If you look at the diagram you showed, there were, I think, like, I don't know, 6 different connections, but you only had 3 different. Okay, if you go back up to the diagram, yeah, and you don't have anything for earth, for ether and fire, or air and earth.
Yeah, good observation. Good sight. So all of these are within each other. Within earth, we're going to have water, fire, ether, air. Even within ether, we're going to have some of these other elements. The same with the Buddhas. What Ayurveda does is they take their elements and they look at how these elements naturally perform biologically, if you will, within the body, and which elements tend to come together to support functions in the body versus others. And what they notice is that, well, ether and air, it comes together to support the movement of the body, the movement of air, the movement of nutrients, the movements of the muscles, and so on. With pitta and some water, it's more the digestive, the transformational, breaking food down, breaking thoughts and ideas down, right? And then earth and water for really building the health and the muscles of the organs and what have you. So it's not that it's that in nature these 3 combinations are naturally inherent in the body's functioning. And not that we couldn't have some air and earth, but they don't really come together. You don't see them anywhere in the biological processes that are happening within the body. But still, each and every dosha has to have all these elements in it. Some are just more dominant than others. So I don't know if that answers, Jane, your question.
Well, yeah, it does.
Okay.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
And I know that we're over. I really appreciate people staying. Yes.
There is one more Sangeeta Sai who is raising hand.
Oh, I just had a comment about that because I had the same thought that the mandala wasn't complete with just the 3 combinations, and I thought that the ether and the fire would probably support the nervous system. It's the nerves are an electromagnetic system, which they might not have known about back then. And the air and the water I saw as the breath, the lungs and the blood that carry the oxygen. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure of the process way back when it was formed of how they looked at the inner body and the outer environment.
So what I would say to that is that we do start to see some of these different combinations when we get into what Ayurveda calls the 7 dhatus, or the 7 tissues of the body. And so one being circulation, another being meta, the fat system, right? So all of these at the systems level, now we start to see more interplay between these different doshas and the elements. So eventually, yes, it does work its way into Ayurveda. Absolutely.
There can be, of course, Sangeeta, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Radhe, thank you very much for the presentation. I just wanted to share that I'm actually by background a medical doctor, but I've been really intuitively immersed in integrality and integral yoga and health. And I presented with Nama, I presented with the Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry. And what I did was also look at the DNA. So when Jan, I think it was Jan and Don mentioned about the actual geometry and the DNA and its functionality, and it's the bridge between the Ayurvedic subtle dhatus and all of the rest into the processing at the physical. So the actual shape and geometry is actually very, very important as the codice. And I will share this with you. We haven't proved it yet in terms of, because I've worked with quantum physicists and biophysicists where we actually had technical equipment where we could verify and look at the meridian system and the chakras inside a body and see the changes that occur when different behaviors are expressed. But I'm pretty certain that Savitri is written through the same codex, which is why Mir Alfaza, the mother, insisted that it was read and understood and continuously, because it was layers and layers, which would then get embodied within the human system through the DNA and the reading of it. So this is, I mean, I'm really happy. And the other synergy, which is really funny, is I've also worked with Dr. Vasant Lad. And so anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. Again, thank you for staying with me. And Don, we look forward next week for your presentation. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.